If you're thinking about buying a trail camera or simply curious about this type of photography, you're in the right place. Today's guest uses trail cameras professionally and will share his expertise with us. Hello and welcome to another episode of Photographing in the West. I'm your host, Kirby Flanagan, and I'm a wildlife and nature photographer. This is episode number 109. Please welcome photographer and wildlife biologist Jerry Rowe. How are you doing, Jerry?
Hey, pretty good. Glad to be on here.
Appreciate it. So tell me how you got started using trail cameras.
I got started in the late 90s in grad school. So I was interested in wildlife connectivity and corridors. And I was working on a project for the California Department of Transportation. And we were interested in trying to develop effective ways to reduce roadkill on sensitive areas of roads where there had been a higher occurrence of roadkill. So we were looking at different types of culverts, pipe culverts, box culverts, that sort of thing. And I was using camera traps back then to determine what kind of animals, mainly small and medium-sized mammals, were using these corridors. So they could augment this and put that into their planning stages for future projects on road safety issues. So back at the time, we were using Trail Masters and Cam Trackers, which were kind of the dominant camera traps of the day. And the Trail Masters were different than most of the camera traps on the market nowadays. They are an active infrared beam. So if anything breaks that beam, it would trigger a photograph to be taken. So it's similar to when you walk into a convenience store like 7-Eleven or something and you break the beam and it chimes the doorbell to let them know that something came in. And those work great because anything that broke the beam, you'd get a picture. You would get some false triggering from leaves or snowfall or sometimes heavy rain, but the camera traps on the market today really focus on dual infrared sensors, which is they call a passive infrared sensor. And those require a animal that has a warm-blooded animal that has a temperature different from the background that's moving across the sensor window. So it has to have temperature and movement in order for it to trigger. And that just results in a lot of false triggering because you can get leaves, branches in the foreground, background moving around, a warm breeze that comes across the sensor window, and that can trigger the camera to take photographs. So that ended up opening the door to doing camera trapping for snow leopards in the Himalayas in northern India in the early 2000s, which rolled into trying to develop a methodology for studying snow leopards using camera traps, doing population censusing, as well as working on a documentary out there.
That had to be exciting.
Yeah, it was good. It was very challenging. Conditions were extremely cold. Some days it was 20 below zero. And electronics oftentimes don't like that kind of temperature extreme. So you get, batteries would drain prematurely. You'd have the fine wiring of the cameras when you opened them up to check and change film cartridges at the time, because this was before the digital imagery. But the wires would snap in the cold. And so we were constantly fixing camera traps, doing soldering repairs, and trying to figure out what was going to work best, what kind of camera was going to work out there. So our study ended up being a lot about trying to figure out what worked and what didn't work to come up with the methodology that other people could use.
Oh. Was that a Nat Geo expedition or some other group?
No, I mean, I did that one at the Snow Leopard Conservancy and Rodney Jackson, but at the time they were filming a documentary, a PBS documentary called Silent Roar by Hugh Miles. And towards the end of the study, Steve Winter, who's a photographer for National Geographic, came out and he had brought some camera traps that they had made, National Geographic had made with DSLR cameras at the time. So he got some amazing photography out there. So it was good to work with him. But the documentary was released in 2006. And I think shortly after that, Steve Winter had a write-up on National Geographic.
Oh, okay. So you're using the camera traps in your business now. Talk about your business a little bit and why you're using them.
Yeah, I run a environmental consulting company, and from time to time, we get the opportunity to employ camera traps for studying a variety of different animals. We most recently did one looking at the riparian brush rabbit, which is a federally endangered species. And we're interested to find if we had these critters on a project site that was just outside of their range. So we had suitable habitat there. There was connectivity where animals could reach that site, but we just didn't know if we actually had that species there. And so we had set up camera traps to be able to do basically a presence absence survey for that. But we also have used camera traps for spearheading new technology or new methodologies for documenting snake and different reptile presence. So instead of using live traps, which end up causing harm or sometimes death to individual critters that get in the traps, this one here will just you could set up a drift fence, put camera traps on either end, and you can record snakes coming through the area, different kind of lizards. And we've been able to get young of the year lizards that are only like an inch and a half long that are actually triggering the cameras. So we're starting to use these in a little different ways rather than completely focusing on warm-blooded mammals.
You mentioned earlier that there were some real challenges with trying to use camera traps with amphibians or reptiles.
Yeah, camera trapping can be all about just trying to troubleshoot. So they're just notoriously finicky, and there's just a variety of things that can go wrong. And even when, we have we have a checklist we take out in the field and make sure, you got fully recharged batteries, you got all the equipment you need. We're all using the same, programmable settings. You double check it and you come back out next week and you find out that no pictures were taken. The camera wasn't on, it shut off for whatever reason. Or the opposite end, it could work sometimes too well. And you have, tens of thousands of images of nothing but just false triggers. So on some of these studies, we've gone 6 months and had upwards of 4.5 million images. Then we have to go through and actually look to see if there's any animals in these, or are they just false triggers? So you spend a lot of time on the other end of the spectrum, analyzing and tagging images.
Oh, that doesn't sound like much fun.
No, that's.
So if somebody wanted to get into this type of photography, what would you suggest as far as the type of camera to get?
It really comes down to what their end goal is, what kind of species they're looking at, photographing. A lot of the standard camera traps that are out on the market, the commercial ones you can get, don't often give you really good images unless you have just the right conditions, the lighting conditions and whatnot. And oftentimes these images can be blurry as animals are moving through the sensor window. But if they're just looking to, capture what's in their backyard, or if it's a citizen science project, something like that, then you can get away with using some of the cheaper brands on the market that are $100, $150 and get relatively good images, enough that you can identify the species. But if you're looking at getting something that's really noteworthy, then sometimes you have to do one of these home-built units where you can modify a DSLR to get some really good images. And it's a lot more time-intensive. There's more cost involved with that. But again, like all the other camera traps, sometimes things don't go as planned. I think there was a documentary in 2014, I believe, called Chasing Ice, and they were looking at glaciers around the world, and they got funding to go all the way up to the North Pole, down to the Antarctic. They sent up, I think, 25 different high quality DSLR cameras and triggering mechanisms, so they're all in time lapse. And they went up there, and there was one part in this video where the researcher just started crying because he was up on a cliff checking a camera trap, and it hadn't been working for months, and so they lost all that data. And that's kind of the essence of camera trapping, just dealing with everything that goes wrong, and trying to troubleshoot, why it's not working and how to fix it. But There are a lot of camera traps on the market. You really can't go wrong with any of them if you're doing something that's very basic. Most of these are variations of the same camera trap. So they're made from the same manufacturer in China, where you could go over there and just tell them that you wanted the Flanagan camera trap, and they would modify the housing of it a little bit, maybe change the number of LEDs that are in there. So you would have your own camera trap on the market. So many of these are just variations on the same theme.
Okay. So I'm guessing that if you use a DSLR, that you get a higher resolution photo than you do with the camera traps. Is that true?
Yeah, definitely. If you think about it, the camera traps, most of them that are on the market now they have the lenses that you would see like in the back of your camera. And so it's a really tiny lens. A lot of times they'll get these lenses in bulk, that are a few generations old, and then throw those in the camera traps. And there's just the quality of the images really vary quite a bit. And so it's really hard to get the camera settings set up on a commercial unit that you could get a really good quality image. In the past, they used to basically hot wire, 35 millimeter cameras. And so the trigger would, trigger the shutter to open. And those you'd get really good quality images, but those are limited to daytime, because the nighttime you have problems with infrared interference on the sensor window. But it's definitely an ongoing challenge. And if you're interested in doing that quality, photography with camera traps, then it's something you need to spend a little more time looking into. There's even some of the top of the line, like $800 to $1,000 camera trap, range, and the price points don't often give a really good quality image. You've got to do something that's a modified DSLR.
Okay. So what would you have to do to modify your DSLR to be able to do something like that?
It really depends on what camera system you have, and I definitely wouldn't take a high quality camera and do that. I would hire somebody that is a specialist in camera electronics to be able to do that. So there's an additional cost in that aspect of things. You can get just kind of an off-the-shelf point-and-shoot camera that works really well. And there's some older camera systems out there. I think Pix Controller is one of them that gives you kind of a setup and a guideline of what you need to go through with different cameras, where you need to do the solders, and what kind of connections you need to make to make that happen. And then you'll have to find what kind of triggering mechanism you'd want to use on that, an active infrared, passive infrared, or something else.
Okay. So there's not a plug and play solution, I guess?
Not that I know of, but I can't say that I've spent a lot of time recently looking at that. So most of the stuff we use are modified research grade camera traps that serve our purposes. So we don't need to get high quality images. We just need to know, is this species on site or not on site?
Okay. So what camera settings work best for trail cameras?
It really kind of depends on the situation, where you have it set up, what kind of species you're targeting. A lot of times, some of these cameras often advertise that they're effective out to 80 or 100 feet. Which is great if you're looking at an open field or a meadow and you want to get like moose, deer, or something crossing and document them in the area. But if you're setting it up on a game trail, or oftentimes what we do, it's like when we're looking at snakes, reptiles, that sort of thing, we have it set up 20 inches from our target animal where it would be crossing under the sensor window. And so there's a real issue with just kind of washing out the images where you have way too many lights, whether it's the white flash or infrared LEDs. And then you almost can't even make out the image of what animal it is just because there's too much light on there. So you really got to take a look at how you're going to set up the camera trap. What's the conditions around there? Is there any vegetation that's going to get in the way? I would often spend some time playing around with the sensitivity, because you don't often want it set on the highest sensitivity, because then you're going to get far more false triggers from, typically from vegetation that's setting it off. It all comes down to setup as well. Not just what settings you program, but getting the right angle, framing the right picture, orient it so you're not getting sunlight directly in the sensor window that can interfere with it during early morning or late evening hours. But I would say take time to learn the camera, learn the settings, play around with it, see what kind of results you're getting in that particular setup. And then you can go back, a day or two later and just tweak the settings and really dial it in for that location and that animal you're trying to target.
So not quite as well developed as the DSLRs, I guess, or the mirrorless, either one.
No, it seems like it's decades behind in what you're getting in terms of quality. Even the research grade ones they have a lot of setup and programmable options, but the end result is like you still often get a blurry or kind of a washed out or just grainy image.
A lot of trial and error, it sounds like.
Definitely.
You mentioned flash, and as I was researching the topic, I see there's 3 types of flash described. The typical white flash that we're all kind of familiar with, and then there's another one called black flash, which I guess is an IR setting, and there's a third one, I forget what the name of it is, but it's a different IR setting. It gives you red light in the photo. So talk about that a bit.
So it really comes down to 2 options. You can use white flash, which we would have on our regular camera that illuminates the whole area. That gives you the best nighttime image, but it also can startle the animal. So you can imagine them walking down the trail and all of a sudden a big flash goes off in their face. So that can cause some behavioral issues, and some animals will avoid that area later on. So you have that compensatory behavioral response that you see. Whereas using infrared is a little more secretive. And then you got 2 options within that infrared where you can use a near infrared where you can see the lights turn on and they have this really faint red glow, which a lot of animals they'll see that, they'll be curious. Some show a startle response and will move away, or you've got that blackout or no glow. Different camera companies call it a different thing, but they put an infrared filter on there that anything in the visible spectrum is cut off. The near infrared illuminators on there actually extend down into the visible red spectrum, which is why we can see it and animals can see it. So if you go with that no glow or blackout option, it's invisible unless that particular animal can see into that infrared spectrum range. Then they're not going to be able to know that it's on. And at that point, it would only be the sound of the camera that would trigger it. So if you really want to be secretive and get pictures of animals without altering their behavior, because a lot of these cameras not only get photos, but they'll also record videos at this point. So you can really get some good sequences of animals in their natural environment, going about doing what they're doing and catching some good video of it.
Okay. So how do you decide where to place a trail camera and how high to place it and those sorts of things?
Yeah. Some of it comes down to the same concepts of photography is just framing. Do you want to get something, if you're attaching it to a tree and looking down onto a trail, it's going to be more of kind of a top-down view, which isn't really that exciting. We generally try to set it up around the chest height of the animal and frame it where we know the animal is most likely to cross in front of that sensor window. So we're trying to orient it so that we're getting the majority of the animal taken up, the majority of the sensor frame or the field of view. But you also want to think about what kind of behavior that animal is going to show. So if it's something on a game trail, it's pretty easy to set it up at a 45-degree angle to the game trail, and you're either going to get something coming or going, and you'll get a pretty good shot of it. But if you're trying to get it in some other kind of tricky situation, or you have a particular habitat feature you're trying to film, a body of water, a rock, or a log or something that an animal might scent mark or spend some time at, then you want to kind of frame it. I've seen this common mistake where people will focus the camera on, say, like a log or a rock, and they're wanting to capture an image of an animal that's standing on top of it. But the top of the image will be cut off because they focused on the log instead of where the animal would be standing. So just taking a little bit of time to kind of identify, what frame do you want to get, and is it set up right so that you'll be able to get the full body of the animal in there. Along those lines, you can also use scents and baits. The use of baits, I know in California, are banned. So you can't bait an animal in, but there's all sorts of different scent lures you can use, from shellfish oils to beaver castor and different things that are really just smelly. And that doesn't necessarily draw an animal in, or it can if it's downwind of it. But if an animal is crossing your camera sensor window, it may cause them to pause and investigate the scent. And so you get more time with the animal in your field of view. And if you're on video mode, then you're getting a lot of different video. But there's other lures out there, like you can get mountain lion urine and different things, which sound exciting, which could elicit more response from animals. But you find out that cats they mark their territory quite a bit, and the lion that you're getting from a manufacturer is either going to be synthetic or old if it's natural urine. And so that's not something I've used that in the past, and I've had, animals, all different varieties of species, just walk by and show absolutely no interest in it. But, when it came to shellfish oil, they really liked it.
Oh, okay. Lots more to it than I would have imagined. I noticed in some of the photos that the cameras are placed fairly high. Is that to avoid damage or theft or both?
It just varies on what our purpose was during that study. Oftentimes, more recently, we've been placing the cameras like on a stake that's facing directly down over a habitat feature, like a game trail or a trail that exits from, like, say, a blackberry bramble where you're going to have like brush rabbits coming out or something like that. So we wanted to get a top-down view so that we could identify certain features. And as you can imagine, some animals are difficult to differentiate down to species just based on a photo. And especially if you're getting a nighttime infrared photo, so you're basically getting it in black and white or a green hue, you really want to be able to pick out those areas of the body that could give you distinguishing markings. So you got to identify it as a particular type of salamander, brush rabbit, whatever critter it may be. But again, these are set up more for a scientific purpose rather than, trying to get a good image.
Okay.
So it does vary.
Well, be sure to stick around because we're going to look at some of Jerry's trail camera photos and discuss them in just a few minutes. So lots more to look at and see and hear about. So how do you secure your trail cameras against theft and damage?
Yeah, theft is always a challenge. Some of the camera traps or trail cameras that are out there have different mechanisms, locking casings that will protect it from damage or to some degree from theft. But if somebody really wants your camera trap, they can definitely take it off the tree, cut the cable that you got it secured with or the lock. A lot of times we'll just kind of take a look at and choose our sites wisely. You're trying to maximize capturability of the animal while at the same time keeping them hidden and out of an area where people might frequent. So if you're on a trail that's used by animals but also used by people, then you run the risk of somebody seeing it and messing with it. You also have to deal with cameras, especially bears, messing with your camera traps. And they can completely demolish a camera. So
Sure.
I've seen some pretty creative homemade units where they got spikes, all over them to discourage the bear from messing with the camera traps.
Yeah, bears are definitely curious animals and very powerful as well. So, yeah.
They can do some real damage.
Yeah. So how often do you have to check your trail cameras as far as battery life and whether they're working or not to be efficient?
Yeah, again, that kind of depends on what kind of settings you have. So if you're running a camera trap where it's just the infrared trigger set up, and you don't expect a lot of activity going through there, then you could go several months in between actually checking it. So the batteries could last long. You don't have a problem with it filling up your card. If you do have an area that's like we had it set up on time-lapse mode and trigger mode, we were taking photographs every 30 seconds. So that can fill up your memory card pretty quick and also drain your battery life. So we ended up checking those weekly. So it really kind of varies on your settings on there. Also the conditions, if you're in a cold environment, like we were up in the Himalayas or any place is extremely cold, your battery drain is going to increase. But you can also, a lot of these camera traps, some of the higher models, you can set them up with an external power source. So you could use rechargeable batteries, connect that to a solar panel so that you could leave those up for months at a time without having to check them. And there are some also that have a cellular connection. So you can buy those and that will email back the photos to your account. So as these are getting taken or, however you have these set up to how often do you want to connect and send sample images back, they can do that. So along with those will also give you information on battery life and how full your memory card is. So you'll have an idea of, do you need to plan to go out there and check it soon and swap out batteries and memory cards or is it good to go for a while?
Yeah, pretty sophisticated. Okay, well, let's look at your photos and talk about them a bit. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can you see that okay?
I can, yeah.
So this looks like daylight, is it?
It was, yeah. It was during the day. That was 1:53 in the afternoon. So this was a Nature Conservancy project site we were looking at and just kind of doing a basic biological review evaluation of the site. And we set up camera traps to get an idea of what kind of mammals are on the site. And sometimes you can see that via what tracks are in the area or different secondary signs of mammals. But this is interesting because they had a problem with a wild boar out there really tearing up the landscape. And I just thought this is a cool photo of all the different the piglets, but you can also see the size of the boars are pretty impressive.
Yeah.
It was just unfortunate they were all kind of facing the other way instead of going to the camera.
Yeah. So where was this?
This was east of San Jose up in the hills by Henrico Regional Park.
Oh, okay. So I guess these are javelinas. Is that the same species?
They're just wild pigs, essentially.
Oh.
So feral pigs.
I see.
Yeah, there's definitely a marked difference in how they develop out in the wild versus if you have them domestically. And there's nothing really, it's not a different species. It's the same thing. It's just under different conditions. They develop different characteristics.
Okay. All right. So is this an adult or a juvenile?
Yeah, it's an adult gray fox. And I like this series that we got from the gray fox because for the Scout Guard cameras, this turned out really, the coloration was good. But he just showed a lot of charisma. He's kind of posing for the camera in this one. And we had a scent lure there. I don't remember what it was, but he spent a lot of time investigating it, rolling in it. He was jumping up in the air and twisting around, and he was just being really playful. So it was great to get this whole series of images.
Yeah. They appear to be quite small as opposed to the red foxes.
Yeah, they're a pretty tiny fox, bigger than the kit fox, but they're really curious. We've had these on an area where coyotes have come through, and then less than 10 minutes later, had a couple of foxes come through. It's like they're following the coyotes, keeping an eye on them for one thing, but also looking at the coyotes like they can benefit from the kills that the coyotes make if there's anything left over.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the same series with the gray fox, but that's where he's investigating the scent. But that one there, it's got beautiful coloration. You can see the black tip tail, that reddish underbelly. Yeah, it's a beautiful looking fox.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
This is a project we did for the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. So it was south of San Francisco on the peninsula and some of the undeveloped lands there that they have. And they had a fair number of sightings from a lot of the caretakers that worked out on the land of mountain lions, just walking down the roads, the trails. And this was a gravel access road. So we put a series of camera traps out there, and we got a lot of different footage of various different cats, which was great. One of the drawbacks you do get with some of these camera traps, I mean, this one here is focused right in the middle of the field of view, which is nice. But we often get pictures where you just see the tail as the cat's kind of exiting the field of view. So that whole time as they're walking through there, the camera hasn't triggered. And this is one of those situations where you might want to adapt your sensitivity to try to get it triggering sooner. It's really frustrating when you have the opportunity to get a really good shot of an animal like a mountain lion or snow leopard or something, and all you get is the tip of the tail.
Yeah, I would think so.
Yeah, this was a project we recently did. This is a long-tailed weasel. And this one we had set up for riparian brush rabbit, and we had alfalfa there for the brush rabbit so that they would spend some time underneath the camera so we could identify the brush rabbit versus desert cottontail. And I was kind of surprised to see this guy kind of come through the camera, and I got a series of him moving through there, which was great. And they're really highly energetic animals. So often in camera traps, you just get a blur unless they stop like this. So it was nice to see him stop right underneath the camera so we could get a good image and a good ID on him.
Is that because the cameras don't have real fast shutter speeds, or just limitations of available light, or what?
I think it mostly has something to do with just the quality of software that's written on these. So they don't maximize, their focus of the camera traps isn't really to capture an amazing image like it would be for a DSLR. They're just trying to put out a camera trap that hunters can use, to find out where, turkeys are the biggest buck is, or for citizen scientists.
Here's one of your amphibians.
Yeah, so this one here is a rattlesnake out in eastern Contra Costa County in California. So we were looking at the use of culverts under a really busy 4-lane road, and they had installed culverts specifically for safe animal passage. And we were looking at everything from endangered amphibians to just a variety of different reptiles and mammals. And we got a lot of really good pictures of snakes going through there, exhibiting some interesting behavior. So we noticed that, they also use these culverts not just as a means to get from one side of the road to the other, but they use them for their intrinsic habitat value. So snakes will thermoregulate inside the culverts. We have a lot of rodents, taking dust baths, even some birds coming in and foraging on insects that are around the mouth of the culverts. So it was interesting to see the variety of animals that'll utilize this kind of feature.
So do the snakes hunt for their prey in these culverts, or?
It's a possibility. When you look at the literature on culverts and corridors and connectivity, it's often brought up that intuitively you would think that, animals such as raccoons or coyotes or something like that this could be a way to funnel animals into a local spot where then predation would be higher. But we're really not seeing that in the data. I don't know if the animals aren't really making that connection, and it may happen from time to time at a specific location, but I'm sure if there is animals in there, that they could prey on. And we do have series of different animals, salamanders, frogs, and stuff preying on a variety of species. We had a funny series of a salamander that was, he ate a slug. You could see him chasing it, got it in his mouth, and then he'd turn around and spit it out and went the other way. So it wasn't quite the meal he thought it would be.
Yeah.
And this is that same location, same project. And this is interesting because it's a spotted skunk. And you could see these here had supposedly had the no glow or the blackout lights on them. But just the fact that the camera trap was oriented like 20 inches above the ground level, he was showing some interest in it. But spotted skunks are one of these critters that you just don't see that often. You don't see them as roadkill. For whatever reason, they'll avoid crossing the roads. So they'll utilize these features like culverts and drainage features far more often than maybe some of the other animals. So it was good to get. We had a whole series of spotted skunks on this project site. So it was good to know that they're abundant in certain areas and frequent the area without seeing them, as roadkill along the road.
Well, thanks for being on, Jerry. This has been great. Very educational.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah. Glad to. Where can people find more information about trail cameras and trail camera photography?
There's a good website called trailcampro.com that they list every trail camera that's available on the market. They do a lot of testing, so you can do comparisons of the different ones, and they have buying guides. So if you're interested in cameras of different varieties, the cheap ones, all the way up to some of the top of the line research cameras. That's a good website resource to go to kind of go over the basics.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah.
I'll put that in the show notes so people can find it easily. Mm-hmm. Each episode of Photographing the West is published on the 15th and 30th of each month. The video version is available on YouTube under Flanagan Photos, and the audio version is available on iTunes as well as most RSS feeds as Photographing the West. Both versions are available on my website at www.flanaganphotos.com. Bye for now, and we'll be back on June 30th with another episode.